Racist cop laughs at black teen in court learns she's a genius detective. The courtroom fell silent as Officer James Harrington's laughter echoed off the wood-paneled walls. His weathered face creased with undisguised amusement as he leaned toward his partner, not bothering to lower his voice. "Can you believe this kid thinks she can prove I planted evidence? 17 years old and thinks she's Sherlock Holmes." Across the room, Zora Williams sat perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on the officer. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. The only movement was her right hand, sketching something in a worn notebook balanced on her lap. "Your Honor," Zora said suddenly, her voice clear and steady in the hushed courtroom. "I'd like to present evidence that Officer Harrington is lying, and I can prove it mathematically." The judge's eyebrows rose, the prosecutor froze mid-objection, and Officer Harrington's smile vanished like smoke in the wind. No one in that courtroom knew they were witnessing the beginning of a case that would shake the foundations of the city's police department and justice system. No one knew the quiet girl with the notebook was about to expose decades of corruption. No one knew Zora Williams at all, but they were about to find out. 3 months earlier, the neighborhood of Oakwood Heights basked in the golden light of late summer. Vintage Cadillacs and Chevrolets cruised down Malcolm X Boulevard, their chrome finishes gleaming. The sweet scent of barbecue drifted from Miss Evelyn's Corner restaurant, where patrons spilled onto the sidewalk, paper plates balanced on their laps as they debated everything from politics to last night's episode of Murder, She Wrote. At the public library, nestled between a record store playing Al Green and a barbershop that hadn't changed its decor since 1975, 17-year-old Zora Williams hunched over a thick book. The air conditioning hummed, providing blessed relief from the August heat. "You're the only teenager I know who spends summer vacation reading about forensic science," said Mrs. Gladys Jackson, the head librarian who'd watched Zora grow up between these shelves. Her silver-framed glasses hung from a beaded chain around her neck, bouncing against her floral blouse as she placed another stack of books beside the girl. Zora looked up, a smile transforming her serious face. "Did you know that the degradation rate of certain chemicals can prove how long evidence has been at a crime scene? It's all about molecular half-lives and environmental variables," Mrs. Jackson chuckled. "In my day, we were reading Tiger Beat and worrying about prom dates." "I'm still figuring out prom," Zora said, her smile fading slightly. "Dad wants me to go, says I need normal teenage experiences." But she gestured at the books surrounding her like a fortress. "Your father just wants you to be happy, sweetheart," Mrs. Jackson said, patting Zora's shoulder. "Marcus Williams is a good man who's raised an extraordinary daughter on his own. Can't blame him for wanting to see you enjoy the simple things sometimes." Zora nodded, though her attention had already drifted back to her book. She had read about the chemical markers left by fingerprint residue when her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "Home by 6. Special dinner tonight." As Zora packed up her books, a commotion near the front desk caught her attention. 2 police officers had entered the library, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere. Mrs. Jackson straightened her blouse and walked over. "Can I help you, officers?" Her voice was polite but cool. The older officer, whose name badge read Harrington, scanned the library. "We're looking for information about some break-ins in the area. Thought we'd check if any of your patrons have been acting suspicious." The way he emphasized patrons made Zora's jaw clench. She recognized the implication in his tone. "Our patrons are community members who value education and literature," Mrs. Jackson replied, her voice steady. "I haven't noticed anything suspicious, except perhaps an unusual interest in our community by officers who don't typically patrol this neighborhood." Officer Harrington's partner, a younger man who looked uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "We're just doing our job, ma'am." "And I'm just doing mine," Mrs. Jackson replied. "Now, unless you have a warrant or specific questions related to library operations, I'll ask you to leave. You're disrupting our readers." Zora slipped her backpack on, moving toward the exit. As she passed the officers, Harrington's gaze settled on her. Something in his eyes made her skin crawl, not fear but recognition, like he knew her from somewhere. "Hey, aren't you Marcus Williams' kid?" he asked, stepping into her path. Zora nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, sir. Your dad's still working at the DA's office." His tone was conversational, but his eyes were cold. "Yes, sir, going on 20 years now." Officer Harrington nodded slowly. "Tell him Jimmy Harrington says hello. We go way back, your dad and me." Something in the way he said it made Zora's stomach tighten. She nodded and slipped past him, feeling his eyes on her back as she pushed through the library doors into the warm evening air. The walk home took Zora through the heart of Oakwood Heights. She passed Mr. Washington's hardware store, where he'd been selling the same reliable tools since before the moon landing. She waved to Ms. Tina, who still styled hair in the same salon where Zora's mother had worked before she died 10 years ago. The neighborhood was changing, new coffee shops appearing alongside soul food restaurants that had been there for generations, but its heart remained. When Zora reached the modest two-story house where she'd grown up, she found her father in the kitchen, his tall frame bent over a pot of his famous gumbo. The recipe had come from her grandmother, who'd brought it from New Orleans during the Great Migration. "Hey, Supergirl," Marcus Williams said, using the nickname he'd given her when she was 6 and insisted on wearing a red cape to school. "How was the library?" "Good," Zora said, dropping her backpack on a chair. "Mrs. Jackson says hi." She hesitated, then added, "I met Officer James Harrington today. He said to tell you hello." The wooden spoon in her father's hand stilled. For a moment he said nothing, his broad shoulders tensing beneath his DA's office polo shirt. "Jimmy Harrington," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "Haven't heard that name in a while. He said you go way back." Marcus turned to face his daughter, his expression unreadable. "We do, not in a good way. Jimmy and I grew up in this neighborhood together, but we took very different paths." He paused. "Stay away from him if you can, Zora. He's not a good man." Before Zora could ask more questions, the doorbell rang. Marcus's serious expression melted into a smile. "That'll be Charles and Diane, our dinner guests," Zora groaned. "Dad, you didn't tell me this was a setup." Marcus laughed. "Charles is my oldest friend, and his daughter is your age. You could use a friend who isn't a dusty book." "My books are not dusty," Zora protested, but she helped her father set the table as voices filled the entryway. Charles Montgomery had been her father's best friend since kindergarten. Now he was a prominent civil rights attorney whose cases regularly made headlines. His daughter Diane was everything Zora wasn't: outgoing, fashionable, and socially adept. "Zora," Diane exclaimed, hugging her. "Dad says you're still a book nerd, but I forgive you." Dinner was filled with laughter and stories. Charles and Marcus reminisced about their youth in Oakwood Heights in the 80s, about mixtapes and basketball games and first dates. "Remember that summer we worked at the community center?" Charles asked, refilling his iced tea. "You, me, and Jimmy Harrington." Marcus's smile faded slightly. "I remember." "Whatever happened to him?" Charles asked. "Wasn't he trying to become a cop?" "He succeeded," Marcus said. "He's a detective now. Zora met him today, actually." Charles raised an eyebrow. "And how was that reunion?" "We didn't really talk," Zora said. "He just asked about Dad." The adults exchanged glances that contained volumes of unspoken history. "Anyway," Marcus said brightly, changing the subject, "who wants dessert? I made sweet potato pie." Later that night, after their guests had left, Zora found her father in his study, staring at an old photograph. She recognized her mother's smile, her father's younger face. And beside them, an officer in uniform, younger, thinner, but unmistakably James Harrington. "What happened between you two?" Zora asked quietly. Marcus sighed, setting down the photo. "It's complicated, Zora, and old history." "Does it have something to do with Mom?" Her father's silence was answer enough. "Dad, I'm not a child anymore. I deserve to know." Marcus rubbed his temples. "Your mother testified in a case, a police brutality case. Jimmy was the officer involved." He paused. "The victim was a teenage boy, not much older than you are now." "What happened to the boy?" Zora asked. "He survived, but barely, and when your mother, who was a nurse at the hospital where they brought him, testified about his injuries." Marcus's voice trailed off. "The blue wall of silence came down," Zora finished. Marcus nodded. "Harrington was cleared of all charges, and 3 months later your mother was pulled over for a broken tail light. They planted drugs in her car." Zora felt her blood run cold. "Was it him, Harrington?" "I could never prove it," Marcus said, his voice tight with old pain. "But she lost her nursing license, had to fight the charges for years, the stress of it all." He didn't need to finish. Zora knew the rest. Her mother's health had declined rapidly after that. The cancer diagnosis came 2 years later. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Zora asked. "What good would it have done? Fill you with the same anger I've carried." "Your mother wouldn't have wanted that." He touched her cheek gently. "You have her spirit, you know, her sense of justice." That night, Zora couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with this new information about her mother, about Officer Harrington, about the teenage boy who'd survived. She pulled out her laptop and began searching. By morning, she had compiled a spreadsheet of every case involving James Harrington over the past 20 years. A pattern emerged, a disproportionate number of arrests of young black men, many with identical circumstances, many involving planted evidence. When Zora finally slept, her dreams were filled with numbers and patterns, evidence and justice. And somewhere deep in her subconscious, a plan began to form. Zora pushed away from the table. "I'm not a child anymore, Dad, and I'm not going to look away from injustice because it's safer." The hurt in her father's eyes made her regret her tone immediately. "I never looked away," he said quietly. "I've spent my entire career trying to change things from the inside, but I also promised your mother I'd keep you safe." Zora reached across the table for his hand. "I know, Dad, and I'm not trying to be reckless, but I've found something important, something that could make a real difference." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Then tell me about it. Let me help you do this the right way." That night, Zora showed her father everything she'd compiled. The statistical anomalies, the timeline impossibilities, the forensic inconsistencies across dozens of cases. Marcus sat in stunned silence, reviewing her meticulous work. "This is extraordinary, Zora, but it's still circumstantial. We need something concrete to take to internal affairs." "I think I know how to get it," Zora said, "but I'll need your help." 2 weeks later, Jamal Foster's case went to trial. Thanks to Zora's research and Ms. Rodriguez's newly energized defense, the prosecution's case began to unravel under cross-examination. Officer Harrington, unused to being challenged, grew increasingly defensive on the stand. The breakthrough came when Ms. Rodriguez introduced evidence that Zora had uncovered GPS data from the patrol car, placing Officer Harrington miles from where he claimed to be when he discovered the drugs in Jamal's backpack. "Officer Harrington," Ms. Rodriguez asked, "can you explain this discrepancy?" "Equipment malfunction," he replied smoothly. "Those systems aren't reliable." "Yet they matched exactly with your radio check-ins throughout the rest of your shift," the lawyer countered. As the officer's testimony began to crumble, Zora watched from the gallery, her notebook open on her lap. She noticed how Harrington's right hand twitched when he lied, a tell she'd observed across multiple court appearances. During a recess, Officer Harrington stormed past her out of the courtroom. He paused, recognizing her, his eyes narrowing. "You're behind this, aren't you?" he said quietly. "Marcus Williams' little girl playing detective." Zora met his gaze steadily. "I'm just an observer, officer." He leaned closer. "Tell your father to rein you in for your own good." The threat was unmistakable, but Zora didn't flinch. "Is that what you told my mother?" Harrington's face hardened. "You don't know what you're messing with, girl." "Actually," Zora replied, "I think I do. Mathematically speaking, the probability that your testimony contains deliberate falsehoods is approximately 98.7%. He laughed then, a dismissive sound that echoed in the marble hallway. "Math, that's your weapon. Good luck convincing a jury with equations, kid." As he walked away, Zora made a note in her book. The confrontation had confirmed what she suspected. Harrington was rattled. And rattled people made mistakes. "Where have you been? I've been calling you for an hour." She realized then that her phone had been on silent since leaving the library. "I'm sorry, Dad. The bus was late and then—" She hesitated. Marcus studied her face. "What happened?" Inside, sitting at their kitchen table with mugs of hot chocolate, Zora recounted her encounter with Officer Harrington. She played the recording of her recollection, watching her father's expression darken with each word. "That's it," he said when she finished. "We're taking this to the DA tomorrow and filing for a restraining order." "Will that be enough?" Zora asked. "He's still out there, Dad, still with a badge and a gun." Marcus reached across the table and took her hands. "One step at a time, Supergirl. We do this right, by the book." The next morning, they went together to the district attorney's office. Marcus's colleague, Ada Sandra Chen, listened gravely to Zora's account and the recording. "This is serious," she acknowledged, "but it's still essentially your word against his. We need more." "I have more," Zora said, pulling out her notebook. "I've been documenting every interaction, cross-referencing his cases, and building a statistical model that demonstrates the improbability of his arrest patterns occurring naturally." Sandra raised an eyebrow, impressed despite her initial skepticism. "Show me." For the next hour, Zora walked the Ada through her research. The patterns were undeniable when presented comprehensively. African-American suspects arrested at 8 times the rate of white suspects for the same offenses. Evidence discovered in identical circumstances across dozens of unrelated cases. Testimony that changed subtly but significantly between arrest reports and court appearances. "This is remarkable work," Sandra finally said, "but we still need something concrete. Something that directly proves misconduct, not just implies it statistically." "What about his own words?" Zora suggested. "If we could get him to admit what he did to my mother or to threaten me again, but recorded properly this time." Sandra and Marcus exchanged concerned glances. "Absolutely not," Marcus said firmly. "I'm not putting you in danger, Zora." "But if we had plainclothes officers nearby," Zora began. "No," both adults said in unison. "However," Sandra added thoughtfully, "your statistical analysis gives us grounds for a deeper investigation. We could pull his body camera footage from the arrests you flagged, review the evidence handling procedures." "That could take months," Zora protested, "and he'll be more careful now that he knows we're watching." The discussion continued, but no perfect solution emerged. They agreed to file for the restraining order and formally request an internal affairs investigation based on Zora's research. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. As they left the building, Marcus put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I'm proud of you, Zora. Your mother would be too." "We haven't won yet," she reminded him. "No," he agreed. "But we've started something important, something that could change things for a lot of people." The following weeks were tense. The restraining order was granted, but Zora still felt Harrington's presence like a shadow over her life. She continued her work with Ms. Rodriguez, expanding her analysis to include other officers who showed similar patterns of behavior. Then, in early November, everything changed. Jamal Foster's younger brother, Andre, was arrested by Officer Harrington for allegedly assaulting an officer during a protest. According to the charges, Andre had thrown a bottle that struck Harrington in the shoulder, an act captured on the officer's body camera. When Zora heard the news, she immediately called Ms. Rodriguez. "This is retaliation," she insisted. "Harrington is punishing Jamal's family because we exposed him." "That's going to be very hard to prove," the lawyer cautioned. "The body cam footage shows someone throwing something that hits him." "I need to see that footage," Zora said. 2 days later, she sat in Ms. Rodriguez's cramped office, watching the video for the 4th time. The protest had been peaceful until police ordered dispersal. In the chaos that followed, a dark figure in a red hoodie could be seen throwing what appeared to be a bottle, which struck Harrington's shoulder. "The figure is too far away to identify conclusively," Ms. Rodriguez pointed out. "But Harrington claims he clearly saw Andre's face before the hood fell forward." Zora frowned, focusing on the timing. "Can we see his dash cam footage from the same time period?" The lawyer pulled up the second video. Syncing them side by side, Zora noticed a 3-second discrepancy between the timestamps. "That's odd," she murmured. "The body cam and dash cam should be synchronized." She watched again, noting the position of other protesters, the movement of officers, the trajectory of the thrown object. "Something's not right," she said finally. "The physics are wrong." "What do you mean?" "The bottle's trajectory. Based on where it appears to come from and where it hits Harrington, it would have had to change direction midair." "That's impossible without external force." Ms. Rodriguez looked skeptical. "Maybe the angle of the footage is misleading." "No," Zora insisted. "I need to analyze this frame by frame. Can I get copies?" That night, Zora converted the video files to individual frames, studying each millisecond of footage. By morning, she had her answer. The body cam footage had been edited almost imperceptibly, but the inconsistencies were there if you knew what to look for. When she presented her findings to Ms. Rodriguez, the lawyer was stunned. "You're saying he doctored official evidence? That's a serious crime, Zora." "I can prove it mathematically," Zora replied. "The bottle's trajectory violates the laws of physics, and there's a 4-frame discrepancy where the background shifts slightly but the foreground remains static. That's impossible in an unedited video." Ms. Rodriguez sat back in her chair. "This is beyond a defense strategy now. This is criminal misconduct by a police officer. We need to take this to a judge," Zora urged. "Andre doesn't belong in jail." "We will," the lawyer promised. "But we need to be strategic. If we're going to accuse an officer of tampering with evidence, we need our case to be airtight." They spent the next week building that case. Zora's analysis of the video became more sophisticated, incorporating principles of physics and digital forensics. She identified 9 distinct anomalies that proved the footage had been manipulated. When they finally presented their findings to the judge, Officer Harrington was in the courtroom, confident the case would proceed as charged. He didn't notice Zora at first, sitting quietly beside Ms. Rodriguez at the defense table. The judge reviewed their motion with a deepening frown. "These are very serious allegations, Counselor. Tampering with body camera footage would constitute multiple felonies." "We understand the gravity of our claims, Your Honor," Ms. Rodriguez replied. "My expert is prepared to demonstrate the evidence of tampering." "Expert?" the prosecutor interjected. "What expert?" Ms. Rodriguez gestured to Zora. "Zora Williams, Your Honor, a forensic video analyst who has identified conclusive evidence of manipulation in the body camera footage submitted by Officer Harrington." The courtroom fell silent as Officer Harrington's laughter echoed off the wood-paneled walls. His weathered face creased with undisguised amusement as he leaned toward his partner, not bothering to lower his voice. "Can you believe this kid thinks she can prove I planted evidence? 17 years old and thinks she's Sherlock Holmes." Across the room, Zora sat perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on the officer. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. The only movement was her right hand, sketching something in a worn notebook balanced on her lap. "Your Honor," Zora said suddenly, her voice clear and steady in the hushed courtroom. "I'd like to present evidence that Officer Harrington is lying, and I can prove it mathematically." The judge's eyebrows rose, the prosecutor froze mid-objection, and Officer Harrington's smile vanished like smoke in the wind. "Proceed, Ms. Williams," the judge said after a moment. "But be aware that this court takes false accusations against officers very seriously." Zora approached the bench, her notebook in hand. "Your Honor, I've analyzed the body camera footage frame by frame. There are 9 distinct anomalies that prove tampering." She walked the court through her findings, her explanation precise and methodical. She demonstrated how the trajectory of the bottle defied the laws of physics, how background elements jumped positions between frames while foreground elements remained static, how the timestamp metadata contained artifacts consistent with editing software. As she spoke, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. The prosecutor's objections grew weaker. The judge's skepticism turned to concern, and Officer Harrington's face hardened into a mask of anger. "Furthermore," Zora continued, "I've identified a reflection in a storefront window that shows Officer Harrington alone, away from the main protest, at the exact moment his body camera supposedly captured Andre Foster throwing the bottle." She pointed to a frame enlarged on the courtroom monitor. "This reflection contradicts his testimony that he was facing the crowd when the bottle was thrown. It's physically impossible for him to have witnessed what he claims." The judge studied the evidence, then looked at Officer Harrington. "Officer, do you have a response to these allegations?" Harrington stood, his voice tight with controlled rage. "This is absurd, Your Honor. She's a child with no formal training making wild accusations. The evidence speaks for itself," Zora interrupted. "Mathematics doesn't lie, Officer Harrington. People do." "Your Honor," the prosecutor interjected, "regardless of these theories." The defendant was arrested at the scene with witnesses who were all police officers under Harrington's command, Ms. Rodriguez pointed out. "And none of their body camera footage has been provided to the defense, despite our requests." The judge's decision was swift and unexpected. "I am ordering an immediate forensic examination of the original body camera footage by the State Crime Lab. Until that examination is complete, the defendant will be released on his own recognizance." As Andre Foster was led away to process his release, Officer Harrington stormed toward the exit. He paused beside Zora, his voice low and menacing. "You've made a mistake, girl, a big one." Zora met his gaze calmly. "The only mistake was yours, officer. You underestimated me." The next day, Internal Affairs seized Officer Harrington's computer and phone. The forensic examination confirmed what Zora had discovered: the body camera footage had been manipulated. Further investigation revealed dozens of similar instances across Harrington's cases. A week later, James Harrington was arrested and charged with evidence tampering, perjury, and civil rights violations. The scandal expanded as other officers from his precinct were implicated in similar misconduct. As news of the arrest spread through Oakwood Heights, Zora found herself at the center of attention. Local news wanted interviews. Community leaders wanted to honor her. Colleges that had previously ignored her applications suddenly expressed interest in her unique abilities. But the moment that mattered most came quietly in the office of District Attorney Alina Marshall. "What you've done is extraordinary," the DA told Zora as Marcus sat proudly beside his daughter. "You've exposed systemic corruption that has harmed countless people in this community." "I just followed the evidence," Zora said simply. "With remarkable skill," the DA replied. "Which is why I want to offer you a position." Zora blinked in surprise. "A position, but I haven't even finished high school," the DA smiled. "A special consultancy. We're establishing a new conviction integrity unit to review cases where there might have been misconduct. Your analytical methods would be invaluable." "You're offering me a job?" Zora couldn't hide her astonishment. "I'm offering you a chance to keep doing what you've already proven you can do, find the truth in the numbers. Help us fix a broken system." The DA glanced at Marcus. "With parental supervision, of course, given your age." Marcus squeezed his daughter's hand. "It's your decision, Supergirl." Zora thought of Jamal and Andre Foster, of her mother, of the countless others whose lives had been derailed by corrupt officers like Harrington, of the patterns she'd identified that suggested the problem went far beyond one man. "When do I start?" she asked. 6 months later, Zora Williams sat in the back of courtroom 3, watching as James Harrington was sentenced to 12 years in prison for his crimes. The judge's words echoed in the hushed room. "You betrayed your oath, your badge, and the community you swore to protect." You used your power to destroy lives rather than save them. And you might have continued indefinitely had it not been for the extraordinary courage and brilliance of a young woman who refused to look away from injustice. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Zora and her father. A journalist thrust a microphone toward her. "Ms. Williams, how does it feel to have brought down one of the department's most decorated officers?" Zora considered the question carefully. "This isn't about bringing anyone down. It's about lifting our justice system up, about making it work the way it's supposed to fairly for everyone. And what's next for the genius detective, as people are calling you?" Zora smiled at the nickname. "I'm just getting started. There are more cases to review, more patterns to analyze, more truths to uncover." As the crowd dispersed, Diane Montgomery appeared, linking her arm through Zora's. "So, are we still on for prom next weekend, or are you too famous now for normal teenage activities?" Zora laughed. "Definitely still on. Dad says I need normal teenage experiences, remember?" Marcus joined them, his expression a mixture of pride and lingering concern. "Speaking of which, there's a college fair next month we should attend." "Actually," Zora said, "I've been thinking, what if I combine college with this work, study statistics and criminal justice simultaneously?" Marcus smiled. "Always figuring out the patterns, aren't you?" "That's my superpower," Zora replied, "seeing what others miss." As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Zora thought about the journey that had brought her here. It had begun with pain, her mother's story, her father's quiet resilience, a community's suffering under systemic injustice. But it had transformed into something powerful, something hopeful. One case at a time, one pattern revealed, one truth uncovered, she was helping to build a more just world. The work was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But for the first time in years, the weight of old injustices felt lighter on her shoulders. Zora Williams, the genius detective of Oakwood Heights, had found her calling. And nothing, not prejudice, not power, not the weight of broken systems, would stop her from pursuing it. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful narratives like Zora's to life. Thank you for watching.